Hi, David. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Jeff. It's good to be here. Nice to meet you.
It's great to have you on the show. My guest today is David Dashiell, and he recently compiled a book called Ever Ancient, Ever New: Why Younger Generations Are Embracing Traditional Catholicism. So, David, why did you compile this book?
Sure. So we put it together. A couple friends from college and myself. We found some other people as well. We put it together really to explain, well, as the subtitle says, why younger generations are embracing traditional Catholicism. So I think the purpose is twofold. One, to reach those who are already sort of in that space, going to Latin Mass, maybe doing more traditional devotions as far as, more frequent fasting or the rosary or that kind of thing, to give them kind of an explanation for people who are asking, and then also to directly give an explanation of those who are asking. I know a lot of the older generations in the Catholic Church are seeing this. They're seeing all these young families going to the Latin Mass, and they're wondering, what the situation is. Why not just go to Mass in your own language? What's the difference? What's all that about? And I think it'll help. I hope it'll help clear up some misunderstandings about that too, because there are some who know those who go to the Latin Mass, but there are some who don't, and they tend to think that sometimes we're angry or bitter or don't agree with Vatican II and that sort of thing. So I'm just hoping here with this book to get the testimonies, the witnesses of several people to show that we love tradition, but we're doing so because we want to follow the Lord Jesus Christ, and we found peace in doing it this way.
Well, let's dive into that. Why do you think so many young people are attracted to the Latin Mass?
Sure. So I think it's twofold. I think for one, it makes sense, and for another reason, there's just a attractiveness, kind of a refuge aspect to it. So first, from the standpoint of making sense, when you go to a Latin Mass, even if you don't fully understand it, and this was my experience, I didn't completely know what was going on. I was looking around. I could tell that there was something important happening, and that everyone was focused on the Lord Jesus Christ. Everyone was focused on the sacrifice happening at the Mass. They knew something important was happening, and there was this sort of atmosphere of reverence. And of course, if you go to Mass, any Mass, whether it's, in English, Latin, whatever language, you know that the reason you're there is to worship God, is to, join in that reenactment of the sacrifice of Calvary. And so if you go to a Mass and you sense this sort of solemnity in the atmosphere, and you can tell that the focus is not necessarily on you, but it's very clearly, physically, from the gestures people do to the incense and bells used, it's on God. Then you can see, this kind of makes sense with what I came here to do, with what it seems the point of worship is. And then secondly, I think there's an attractiveness to that. Some of those same elements, they really show forth the truth, the goodness, and the beauty of the church, but also of God himself. There's a sense, especially at the Latin Mass, where you come and you see, I can't really get this anywhere else. This isn't the same thing as a concert. This isn't the same thing as a talk. It's not the same thing as, a light show or something like that. It has kind of elements from those things. It really engages your senses. But there's something deeper. There's some sort of deeper attractiveness, some timeless quality to it.
What attracted you to the Latin Mass?
So I think it was both of those things. It was sort of a gradual process for me. So I actually minored in Latin. I got my degree in theology, minored in Latin. So I understood a little bit. That helped a little bit of the words. But I had never really heard of the Latin Mass, and a friend introduced me. And I think, first of all, the reverence struck me. But at the very same time, it also struck me that this was something that really fit with my personal style of prayer. So I'm an introvert. I would prefer to be a little more contemplative. I say prefer because I have a 2-year-old daughter. It's not always possible. And so when I went to the Latin Mass, especially low Mass, which is just kind of a more monastic type, a more silent type, doesn't have music, it really helped me to enter in and to meditate. Even if I didn't know what was going on, I could focus on the actions of the priests and the altar servers and I could really try to pay attention to the symbolism in that, pray quietly, and I noticed that that atmosphere was sort of encouraged. I could respond to certain things, but I didn't necessarily have to. I didn't have to feel pressured.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's how it started for me. Just, oh, this is nice. This seems very meditative. And then as we went more and more frequently, I got engaged to my now wife. We started talking to people who went, and they seemed like very, nice, well-adjusted people. And I started researching more. So I had a theology background, but I hadn't researched the liturgy specifically. And then as I researched and compared it to what I had experienced going to Mass in English, which we call the Novus Ordo, throughout my life, I began to see, this kind of makes sense why we have, these specific prayers that aren't always there in the Novus Ordo, or, why we use bells at this time, or why the altar server is doing this sort of a gesture, that kind of thing. And so after it kind of attracted me, I began to get these explanations for, it actually kind of makes sense to have it this way.
Mm-hmm. Now there's two masses, the high mass and the low mass. Can you explain what the differences are there?
Sure. So the low mass, it's going to be your typical daily mass because it has, less trappings, less frills. It's, I believe it started as a more like monastic version, a stripped down version. So it's, both have the same structure, low and high mass. Really the difference is a high mass is a sung mass. And that's not just having hymns. So you could actually have a low mass with, say, an opening and a closing hymn, with the procession in and the recessional out.
Right.
But with the high mass specifically, you have the mass parts themselves being sung as well. So, for example, you have right before the collect, which is the same in the Novus Ordo, you do the Kyrie, the penitential rite, and the priest says, "Let us pray." Does that short prayer called the collect before the readings. There's another prayer before that called the introit, which is just an antiphon, which is also optional in Novus Ordo. Not a lot of priests do it. Mm-hmm. And it's usually a verse from a psalm or a couple verses sung as the priest is praying prayers at the foot of the altar, kind of in preparation for Mass. And so those things, little Mass parts like that, the Alleluia verse before the Gospel, things like that are sung by the choir in a high Mass. Mm-hmm. They're usually sung in Gregorian chant, so it's slower, a little more contemplative. Whereas in low Mass, those parts aren't sung, they're just spoken by the priest. So as a result, low Mass tends to be a little quieter, have a little more of a contemplative feel. There's a lot more silence. Whereas high Mass, you have the Mass part sung, you have responses sung, and so there's more of that kind of call and response that most people are familiar with in the Novus Ordo as well. And then high Mass also has incense as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So you mentioned a few of the differences between the two. What are some of the other differences between the Norvus Ordo and the traditional Latin Mass?
Oh, Novus Ordo and traditional Latin Mass. Sure. So they have the same basic structure. There are a few differences which I'll get into. I mean, the big major similarity is that both of them bring Jesus Christ to us in the flesh, in the Eucharist, his body, blood, soul, and divinity. So that's the most important similarity in my mind.
Absolutely.
And they have the same basic structure. I believe they're slightly different names, but you've got the Liturgy of the Word and the Liturgy of the Eucharist and the Novus Ordo. And I believe it's same thing, but called the Mass of the Catechumens and Mass of the Faithful in the Latin Mass and Low and High Mass. And so you've got that structure. There is a difference at the beginning. In Latin Mass, you have prayers at the foot of the altar. So before the priest comes up and makes the sign of the cross to sort of, begin the main part of Mass, that's the penitential rite, all that, just the same in both. You have him kneeling at the foot of the altar at the steps with an altar server, and he recites, I believe it's Psalm 42, which includes the lines, "I will go unto the altar of God, to God who gives joy to my youth." And so the priest and the server are doing this call and response, saying, we're praying to the Lord, we're preparing to go up to his altar. And they do actually a Confiteor, which is an option in the Novus Ordo, I confess to Almighty God, etc. They do that to prepare themselves at the beginning. Mm-hmm. So there are shorter things like that. that are in the Latin Mass that you won't find in the Novus Ordo. Ultimately, the many things can be similar, but they don't have to be. So in the Novus Ordo, Mass in English or in the vernacular, whatever language you speak naturally, you have a lot of options, whereas you'll find that one of those options is what's always used in the Latin Mass. So if you can remember the Eucharistic prayer that's Linus, Cletus, Clement, Sixtus, Cornelius, etc., goes through that whole martyrology, that is the only Eucharistic prayer used in the Latin Mass. And so there are a lot of things like that where there are options in the Novus Ordo, but in the Latin Mass, there is one set of prayers. The only things that change would be called the propers, which also change in the Novus Ordo. So you've got readings, you've got the introit, the collect, which I described, which will change for certain feast days, that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. Thank you on that.
Sure.
So, David, one of the things that you have in the title of the book is embracing traditional Catholicism. What is traditional Catholicism?
That is a great question. It's a label I accept reluctantly because it's just so general. But it's hard to find a good term. So traditional Catholicism, I would say, is Catholicism as it has been consistently lived through the centuries. So just practices that you'll find in the writings of the saints. So you could say, for example, that abstaining from meat on Fridays is a traditional Catholic practice. That's something that's recommended to us. All we're required to do in the United States is to make some sort of sacrifice on Fridays, then abstain from meat on Fridays in Lent. So we have the option, don't necessarily have to do it. So that's one traditional practice. Another one I can think of is the rosary, prayed throughout the centuries, Marian devotion. So a lot of these things aren't necessarily specific to the Latin Mass, although the Latin Mass itself, I think, is a key point of this thing called traditional Catholicism, because it's the Mass of St. Peter. Jesus Christ passed on certain things to his apostles. They set up the different rites. So the Roman Rite, the Byzantine Rite, etc. And then those slowly developed over time. So we've had the Latin Mass in more or less the same form, with small things being added through the centuries from about, 100 years after Christ to now, really. But the Novus Ordo was added, as another type of Mass in the Roman Rite in the 1960s. Mm-hmm. So I would just say traditional Catholicism is Catholicism that focuses on those stable elements that most Catholics have latched onto through the centuries.
Mm-hmm. One of the terms that you hear sometimes are trads, and that can be sound like a bad term or it can be a good term, right? Mm-hmm. And sometimes I've noticed, even on Catholic websites or Catholic blogs, that it appears that there are some traditional Catholics that look down upon people that attend the Norvus Ordo, or look at them as lesser Catholics. And some people that attend the Norvus Ordo look down on the traditionalists because, that's something that is old. It's something that it's different. Why don't you go to this type of Mass, and why do you have to do that type of Mass?
Right. Yeah, I definitely see that. I would say, and a big part of the reason why, a big part of the reason for this book really is just to show people that those people who do exist, who look down on those who attend the Novus Ordo, they're not the majority by any stretch of the imagination. Most of the people who attend the Latin Mass are people who are just trying to follow the Lord and who have found peace in the Latin Mass and these traditional devotions. And they think, they often think it's the best way to do it. No, that doesn't mean you have to look down on somebody who attends the Novus Ordo. My wife and I will still go from time to time, but we think that there's certain things in the traditional Latin Mass worship God, more effectively and that sort of thing. But yeah, I would say that's part of the reason why I try to get away from the label of trad or traditional Catholic. It's very easy, it's a nice shorthand. Yeah. But I would like to be able to say, well, no, I'm just a Catholic. Of course, that doesn't mean that those who attend the Novus Ordo aren't Catholic. We're all Catholic, you know. I'm a Catholic, and it's not even a matter of preference either. It's not necessarily that I happen to prefer more traditional things. It's, in my journey of walking with the Lord, I found that, this fits well with what I know about worship and that sort of thing. So I think it can be easy to see, and from both sides really, how the other side, those who attend the Novus Ordo or those who attend the traditional Latin Mass, how they're just sort of seem to be, acting on their preference or, doing things out of bitterness and that kind of thing. But I think in reality, if you get right down to it, most people who attend either Mass will say, no, well, I'm just trying to, worship the Lord. And this is the best way I found to do it.
Absolutely. Is it harder to find a Latin Mass since the Pope issued the motu proprio, I'll say it in English, the guardians of the tradition, back in July?
I think so. So for those who don't know as much, Traditionis Custodes, which is the Latin title, or Guardians of Tradition, came out back in July, and it was essentially a restriction of the Latin Mass in different ways. So, for example, new priests would have to ultimately get approval from Rome in order to be able to say the Latin Mass. No new groups were to be started, that sort of thing. So that's it's very restrictive on its face. And if you read his letter to the bishops accompanying it, you'll see that, Pope Francis is concerned for unity. And he would like eventually, he says as much, he would like eventually everyone to go towards celebrating in the vernacular in the Novus Ordo, the Mass of Paul VI. However, the bishops do have authority to dispense from law, which the motu proprio is a type of, it's a type of church law. And so in a lot of dioceses, what you saw was the bishop said, just keep doing what you're doing. You're doing great work. We don't think that you're harming unity in any way. So, Pastor X of Latin Mass parish over here, just keep doing what you're doing. So I think in those dioceses, of which mine is one, the Diocese of Nashville, I don't think it's any harder to find a Latin Mass parish. I think there are a lot of dioceses in which the bishops also said, well, we know what Pope Francis wants. He's made it pretty clear. He would like most Catholics to go to the Novus Ordo. So we're going to, let this continue, let the celebration of the Latin Mass continue, but we're going to sort of, draw back slowly. And so I think in those dioceses, in the extreme, you can go to the Diocese of Chicago. You have a situation where it's a lot harder to find a Latin Mass because now you can't advertise it as much, or it can only be on certain Sundays of the month. And so if the faithful are looking for it, they can't find it as easily. So I think it's kind of a both and. I certainly think with this motu proprio, the magnifying glass has sort of gone over the traditional Catholic community. So more people are looking for that. But I think in some dioceses, it's still a little harder, depending on how the bishop implements things.
Do you see, David, that this potentially creates a division in the church?
I think so. I know the Holy Father's intention is for unity. I respectfully disagree that that's the way to achieve it. I think you'll find that a lot of Catholics agree on, or really Catholics who attend both forms of the Mass in the Roman Rite, that it wasn't those who were hindering unity. They kind of would have been doing it anyway. I won't name specific people, but I think we all know of some, podcasters in the traditional space who sometimes act more like political pundits, and they're looking for scandal in the church. They're looking to exploit that, and they really foster an us versus them mentality. But I think by and large, there's really a desire to share the riches of both forms of the liturgy. People who really love the Novus Ordo are going to talk about, well, we love this sort of communal atmosphere. We like that we can see everything. We understand everything that's going on. Those who attend the Latin Mass will say, we love the atmosphere of reverence. We love this focus on the worship of the Lord. And we like that, some things are harder for us to understand because we know it's not all about us. So both of those things can enrich each other. And you see that often in celebrations of the Novus Ordo, where the priest is turned toward the Lord, ad orientem, let's call it, toward the east. And some things are in Latin, some things are in English, some things are sung, some are not. So you can see that sort of mutual enrichment happening. So I think that it is good for unity to have both forms out there. And I think that it's difficult when something like this motu proprio comes on the scene, because you get a lot of people, like family members, for example, they're asking, well, why is there the need for this? Mm-hmm. And so you can see from one perspective, well, there are these traditional Catholics who are very much fostering division. But then from another perspective, you can see, well, actually, those people are the minority as well. And it seems like there really is this mutual sharing of riches from both forms.
It just seems to me odd, personally, because so many young people are attracted to the beauty of it. And I think that beauty is something that is very attractive of the traditional Latin Mass.
Definitely.
And it just seems really odd to me that you would put in that separation and, in essence, okay, we don't want you going to this when it is so attractive to young people.
Right. I think and I can sort of see where the Pope is coming from. The troubling part is, in his letter, he says, I've really seen a lot of abuse happening with both forms of the liturgy, but he proceeds to talk just about the Latin Mass.
Right.
And so I think that has led to an overreaction in some traditional circles. They're sort of, I don't remember what they call it, but they're going to the worst Novus Ordo masses they can find. And they're taking a video and they're saying, look at all this.
I've been to some of those masses.
Right. No, so have I. I work some youth conferences like that as well. But, so I think that's an overreaction, but it is a legitimate concern where, we do, in these Latin Mass communities, we have some things to watch out for. We can start to think like, wow, this is so beautiful. Like, this must be the only way. This must be the Mass of the ages. This must be the only one that approximates the heavenly liturgy and revelation. And that's not true. You think about all the other rites of the church. Obviously, there are different aspects that mirror heaven. But then on the other side, you're also seeing, well, there are things to work on as well in more Novus Ordo parishes, where sometimes you have a little bit of a problem with catechesis because the Mass itself isn't always built for that as well as the Latin Mass. Mm-hmm. So both have things to work on, I think.
I would love to see more pieces of the traditional Latin Mass come into the Norvus Ordo, and I believe personally that Pope Benedict wanted that to happen.
Yeah, it seems like it. And I think a lot of priests in their 20s, 30s, 40s right now are really trying to do that, whether they're pastors or assistant pastors. I'm seeing it a lot in Nashville. I mean, the masses by and large, wherever you go, are very reverent. We have one St. Mary of the Seven Sorrows downtown that basically is as close as you can get to the Latin Mass without being the Latin Mass. But then you have others where, the priest might sing the antiphons, or the priest might always say the same Eucharistic prayer, or he might be, facing the east, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. And when you say facing the east, just to clarify for the audience, that means that the priest has his back to the crowd.
That's true. Yes, that is.
He's hopefully facing a tabernacle in front of him and the altar.
Mm-hmm. Right. And if he's not, Pope Benedict had recommended that there be a crucifix on the altar, so that he's more visibly facing the Lord. Because you're right. And I think a lot of people will describe it as, back to the people, which is true. The priest's back is to the people. But I think the reason why I say to the east, ad orientem is the Latin phrase, is because that's actually meant to be the focus. That's the reason why. It's not because he doesn't like the people. It's because he's turning toward the east, where we believe that Jesus will come from in the second coming. And so it's not always literally the east. Not all churches are built that way anymore. So I like to call it liturgical east, because that's the thought behind it. But people also call it, I think Cardinal Sarah calls it this ad deum, which is toward the Lord.
Right.
That's the so and there are different emphases there. In the Novus Ordo, the priest is facing the people. It's called versus populum, turn toward the people, to clue them in a little bit more on what's going on. You have a lot more call and response in the Novus Ordo. Lord be with you and with your spirit, etc. And in the Latin Mass, there's less of that. And the focus is more, okay, the priest is offering the sacrifice on our behalf, the sacrifice of Calvary. And we are all facing the same direction. We're joined with him. We're uniting ourselves to that sacrifice. So it's different emphases.
Mm-hmm. David, what else would you like to share with the regular Catholic guys out there?
Sure. So I think I'd like to, and I think a lot of the authors of the book too would like to just invite people to try out the Latin Mass, because I think the big thing I'm learning, and I've learned, is that there are a lot of misconceptions out there, and it's an easy thing to kind of try out something like the Latin Mass or hear about it and then give up really quickly. I mean, I know even with me, I was a minor in Latin. I knew the language fairly well, but I still had a lot to learn. It took me probably, 6 months or so to be comfortable with it completely, because you don't understand the language and you might not understand the prayers. And so if you go, I would say, go with a friend if you can, who attends. Give it a good, few tries at least. And then I would even say, go for 2 or 3 months when you can, and maybe get a missal, maybe get something small and easy. So in the Novus Ordo, you've got Magnificat. It has the meditations. It has all the readings for the day. There's the same thing in Latin. I'm plugging in a little bit because I'm the proofreader. It's called Benedictus. And it has the same stuff in Latin and in English. So exactly what the priest is saying. And then, see how it impacts you and really come with an open mind. And if you end up going back to the Novus Ordo, okay, but at least you've given it a try. Because I think a lot of people, they hear about the Latin Mass and they see Latin Mass and they think, wow, this is kind of difficult. And it's true, it is. But I think the best things in life are as well.
Absolutely. One of the things, too, is if you are going to go to a traditional Latin Mass, is that you want to dress up. That's true.
And I think that's kind of that atmosphere of reverence. Obviously, that isn't part and parcel of the Latin Mass. It's not in the rubrics or anything. In fact, they don't really have rubrics for the people. But yeah, you will find that basically everybody's dressed up. You're also finding
a lot of place if you don't.
Right. It's pretty funny. I noticed you have this kind of intimidating aspect where people are so dressed to the nines, but then you also have this nice aspect where people are willing to chat. But then if you pass by someone who's one of the more outspoken people, you can be like, oh wow, these people are kind of crazy. But then if you notice, if you look a little closer and you even just walk up to somebody, you haven't been to a Latin Mass before, and maybe even you're there alone, you walk up to someone and say like, hey, I'm new here. Like, can you tell me what this is all about? They're more than willing to talk about it. Yeah. The funny thing is, so at the Mass I go to, every Mass is in Latin except for one of them on Sunday. And I noticed I was staying after Masses for something yesterday, and I noticed that everybody stayed after Mass, after the Latin Masses, and the English Mass, a lot of people left. There were a couple groups, but a lot of people just went right to their cars. And it's funny, even if you don't know someone, how willing people are to share that sort of thing, there seems to be this kind of enthusiasm about it.
Mm-hmm. I just didn't want people to feel out of place when they go. And granted, you're accepted no matter what, but it's just a matter, you'll be a lot more comfortable if you don't show in jeans and a t-shirt.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And also, it's good to know that, and you can do this at the Novus Ordo too, but I think the atmosphere, discourages it to an extent. It's totally fine if you don't understand what's going on. Obviously, you want to get to that point. You want to know what the readings are. You want to know what the prayers are. But you don't have to follow along every time, because the important thing, and this is the purpose of any Mass, the important thing is to unite yourself to that sacrifice of the priest, to the priest representing, making present again the sacrifice of Christ on the altar. And so even if you're paying attention to the movements of the priest, to the server, or you're quietly praying a rosary, imagining different events from the Passion, that sort of thing, you can still unite yourself to that sacrifice, even if you don't follow along with every single word, you don't know every single prayer that's being said. So I think that's another thing that'll help put people at ease, because I know from experience, you go to a Latin mass and you think, I don't speak this language. I haven't been here before. I don't necessarily know what the priest is saying. What am I supposed to do? And it can be kind of comforting to know that while it's good to know those things and eventually you'd want to get there, you don't have to know. You just have to unite yourself to that sacrifice that's going on.
David, where's the best place to get the book?
The easiest place to get the book would be Tan Books, the website. It's also sold on Amazon and Target. I believe Target is sold out at the moment. Okay. They get some more copies, but you can also find it on Amazon.
All right, we'll go ahead and we'll put a link to the book on the show notes. And I want to thank you for explaining the differences between the traditional Latin Mass and the Norvus Ordo. I think it's really helpful for the audience because I know a lot of them haven't ever attended a traditional Latin Mass, and just to understand what those differences are and similarities, because we're all there for the Eucharist.
Definitely.
Is really important. And thank you for taking the time, David. God bless you.
Yeah, happy to talk. God bless.
Thanks.